What if the woman you chose to spend the rest of your life with, the woman you trusted with everything, the woman you believed loved you, was secretly destroying someone right under your roof? Not out of anger, not out of jealousy, but out of pure, calculated hatred for someone she saw as less than human. And what if the only person who witnessed every single moment of that cruelty was a woman the whole world had already decided didn't matter? A woman who couldn't speak. A woman who couldn't fight back. A woman who had already accepted that her pain was invisible, because in every house she had ever worked in, it always was. This is not a made-up story. This is the kind of thing that happens every single day behind the closed doors of homes that look perfect from the outside. And what one man did when he finally saw the truth, what he did to the woman he married, is something you need to watch until the very end. Because the way this story ends will stay with you for a long time. If stories like this hit different for you, if you feel something real watching this unfold, then hit that subscribe button right now and make sure you turn on notifications. Stay until the very end. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The black Mercedes G-Wagon cut through the rain-soaked streets of Seoul at 2:47 in the morning. The engine growled low, like something alive, something patient. Kwon Yi-ho gripped the steering wheel with one hand and loosened his tie with the other. He had not planned on coming home this early. The meeting with the Busan syndicate was supposed to run until dawn. But when word reached him through his lieutenant that the deal had already been sealed, he saw no reason to stay another minute in that smoke-filled room full of men pretending to be important. At 43, Kwon Yi-ho was not the kind of man you would recognize if you passed him on the street. He did not appear in newspapers. He did not show up at charity galas wearing a name tag. He was a shadow, the kind of shadow that made other shadows disappear. As the heir to the Kwon family's underground empire, he controlled territory stretching from Seoul to Incheon, an operation that moved money, influence, and silence with equal precision. Businessmen owed him favors. Politicians took his calls, and none of them ever talked about why. But here is the thing about Kwon Yi-ho that most people never saw: the man behind the empire, the boy he used to be. When he was 7 years old, living with his grandmother in a cramped apartment on the east side of Seoul, he used to steal bread from the convenience store on the corner. Not because he was hungry, because there was a stray cat that lived behind the dumpster, skinny and half-blind, and that cat had no one else. His grandmother found out eventually. She didn't punish him. She just looked at him with those tired eyes and said, "Yi-ho, the world will try to make you hard. Don't let it." He had spent the last 36 years trying to honor that. His penthouse sat on the top floor of one of Gangnam's most exclusive towers, floor-to-ceiling glass, imported Italian marble, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine nobody actually read. His wife, Choi Soo-yeon, had decorated every inch of it herself. And if you walked through that apartment, you would think it was the home of two people who loved each other deeply. Everything was perfect. Everything was polished. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. But perfection, Yi-ho was about to learn, can be the most dangerous disguise in the world. He stepped out of the elevator directly into the penthouse foyer. The apartment was dark, almost completely dark. The only light was coming from the kitchen, a thin golden line bleeding out from under the door like a secret trying to escape. He loosened his tie the rest of the way and moved quietly toward it. His footsteps made no sound on the thick carpeting Soo-yeon had imported from Milan. She had been very specific about that. She was always very specific. That was when he heard the voice. It was soft, it was accented, and it was trembling. "I am sorry, Mrs. Soo-yeon. I only wanted to check if you needed something before I went to bed." Yi-ho stopped walking. Something in that voice made his chest tighten, not the words themselves. It was the way they were delivered, like an apology that had been rehearsed 100 times. Like someone who had learned that the safest way to exist in a room was to make yourself as small as possible. The voice belonged to Zara Akifer. Zara was 34 years old. She was Nigerian-American, born in Lagos and raised in Houston. She had deep brown skin, steady hands, and eyes that carried something Yi-ho had noticed the very first time they met, a quiet, unshakable strength. The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. The kind that just holds. She had come to Seoul 8 months ago through a placement agency that specialized in finding domestic workers for wealthy households across Asia. Before that, she had worked for families in New York, in Chicago, in Boston, always in other people's homes, always invisible, always the one person in the room that nobody truly saw. When Yiho first interviewed her for the position, she had done something no one had ever done in his presence. She looked him directly in the eye, not nervously, not deferentially, but with a calm steadiness that caught him off guard, and she said, "Mr. Kwon, I want you to know 3 things about me. I work hard, I keep my word, and I don't disappear." He hired her on the spot. But Soo-yeon had never seen Zara the way Yiho did. Soo-yeon saw something else entirely. And what she saw, Yiho was about to discover, had been festering for months. "Did I ask you to come out here?" Soo-yeon's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. There was no warmth in it, no pretense. This was not the Soo-yeon who smiled at dinner guests and touched Yiho's arm in public and laughed at the right moments. This was someone else, someone Yiho had never heard before. "Did I call for you? Did I ring the bell?" "No, Mrs. Soo-yeon. I just heard a noise and I thought." "You thought," Soo-yeon laughed. It was short and cold, and it made something in Yiho's stomach drop. "You imagined something, and then you came out here uninvited in the middle of the night looking like that. Do you know what time it is? Do you have any idea where you should be right now?" "In my room, Mrs. Soo-yeon." "In your room? Yes. The room I gave you out of my husband's generosity. The room with a single bed and no window. You should be grateful you have a roof over your head at all. Women like you, women in your situation, usually end up on the streets. So when I tell you to stay in that room after hours, you stay. Do you understand me?" Yiho pressed his back against the marble column beside the kitchen entrance. His hands were clenched at his sides. His jaw was tight. Something was building inside his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Something hot and dangerous and very, very close to breaking through. "Mrs. Soo-yeon, I don't understand what I did wrong." "You did everything wrong the moment you stepped foot in this house." Soo-yeon's heels clicked against the marble as she moved closer to Zara. Each click sounded like a small, deliberate punishment. "You are the maid. That is all you are. You clean when I tell you to clean. You cook when I tell you to cook. You disappear when I tell you to disappear. And you never speak to me unless I speak to you first. Is that clear?" There was a pause, a long, heavy pause. "Yes, Mrs. Soo-yeon." "Good. Now get out of my sight." Yiho listened to Zara's footsteps move down the hallway. They were quiet, careful, defeated, and then, just before they faded completely, he heard it. A sound so small it almost disappeared into the silence of the apartment. A single sob, swallowed almost instantly, like someone pressing their hand over their mouth to keep the pain from escaping. Yiho closed his eyes. He breathed in slowly through his nose. He had spent decades in rooms full of dangerous men. He had stared down rivals who wanted him dead. He had made decisions that changed the lives of hundreds of people without flinching. But standing in that hallway, listening to a woman cry alone in the dark because she had been taught that her tears didn't matter, that was the moment something inside him shifted. Permanently. He waited until the apartment was quiet again. Then he stepped into the kitchen. Soo-yeon was pouring herself a glass of wine. Red, expensive. She held it by the stem the way people do when they want you to know they know how to hold a wine glass. Her silk robe was tied perfectly at the waist. Her posture was relaxed, completely relaxed. The posture of someone who believed she was alone, who believed no one had heard a word. "Soo-yeon." She turned. And for just one fraction of a second, one tiny crack in the mask, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, not shame, calculation. Her brain was already working, already building the story she was going to tell. Then the mask snapped back into place like it had never moved. "Yiho," she smiled. The same warm, practiced smile she gave him every morning. The same one she gave his business partners at dinner. "You're home early. I wasn't expecting you until morning. Are you hungry? I can have Zara prepare something for you." Yiho stared at her. He studied her face the way he studied people he was about to destroy. What did you just say to her? Soo-yeon tilted her head slightly. Innocent, confused, a perfect performance. To who? Oh, Zara came out of her room uninvited. I simply reminded her of the boundaries we discussed when she was hired. You know how it is, Yeho. Household staff need structure. Without it, things fall apart. You called her women like you. What exactly did you mean by that? Soo-yeon waved her hand dismissively and took a long sip of her wine. I don't remember the exact words. It was a simple correction. She'll be fine by morning. Now stop worrying about the help and come sit down. You must be exhausted. Yeho said nothing. He turned and walked toward the security panel near the main entrance of the penthouse. It was a system Soo-yeon knew existed. She had been there when it was installed, but she had never once paid it any attention. In her mind, cameras and recordings were things that happened in other people's lives, not hers. He pulled out his phone, opened the app, pressed play. And what Kwon Yeho saw over the next 4 hours changed everything. The footage was organized by date. He started 3 months back and worked forward, one recording at a time. Each one was worse than the last. Each one revealed another layer of something that had been happening right under his nose, in his own home, while he was busy building an empire and believing his life was exactly what it appeared to be. He watched Soo-yeon tell Zara, calmly and without emotion, that she was not allowed to eat at the dining table. Ever. Not when guests were present. Not when the apartment was empty. Not under any circumstances. Zara was to eat in the storage room, alone, whatever was left over from the previous night's meal. He watched Soo-yeon assign Zara cleaning tasks at 5 in the morning, before dawn, before the sun came up, so that by the time Soo-yeon woke at 9, every surface in the penthouse was spotless, and there was no visible evidence that anyone other than Soo-yeon had been awake for hours. He watched Soo-yeon find a letter Zara had written to her mother in Lagos, a simple letter handwritten, folded neatly, and tear it into small pieces, one by one, slowly, deliberately, dropping the pieces into the trash while Zara was in the next room and couldn't see. Each one hit Yeho like a blow, but it was the recording from 3 weeks ago that stopped him cold. He had been in Japan for a business summit. Soo-yeon had hosted a dinner party that night for the wives of several associates. What Yeho didn't know, what he was only now learning, was that Zara had spent 3 entire days preparing for that dinner. Not because Soo-yeon asked her to. Because Yeho had mentioned, casually, during a phone call weeks before, that he missed home-cooked food. That he wished someone would make something with real heart in it when he got back. Zara had heard him say that, and she had remembered. She spent 3 days perfecting a recipe, a Korean-Nigerian fusion dish that blended the flavors of both worlds in a way that was unexpected and beautiful. She set the table herself. Fresh white lilies in simple glass vases. Clean linen napkins folded with care. Candles placed just so, the kind of quiet, thoughtful arrangement that took hours to get right and looked effortless when it was done. The recording showed Soo-yeon walking into the kitchen that evening, 1 hour before the guests were supposed to arrive. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at the table. She looked at the flowers. She looked at everything Zara had done. And then she spoke. What is this? Her voice was dangerously calm, the kind of calm that comes before something very bad happens. Zara appeared from behind the counter, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. I prepared the table for your dinner, Mrs. Soo-yeon. Mr. Kwon mentioned last month that he... My husband mentioned something to you, Soo-yeon's voice sharpened. Since when does my husband talk to you about anything? He asked me to prepare something special, I thought. You thought? Soo-yeon repeated the word like it tasted bad. She walked to the table. She picked up one of the lily arrangements, simple white flowers, the kind that cost almost nothing, and she dropped them on the floor. Just like that, without looking at Zara, without caring what it did to hear. You don't think, you follow instructions. Now clean all of this up. The guests arrive in 45 minutes, and I don't want a single trace of your little project anywhere in this apartment. But Mrs. Soo-yeon, the food. Throw it away. Mrs. Suyeon, I spent 3 days. Suyeon turned, and the look on her face, the look that Yiho saw frozen on his phone screen in the dark of his study, was something he would never forget. There was nothing human in it. No anger, no frustration, no conflict. Just a cold, flat certainty. The look of someone who had already decided that another person's feelings did not exist. Did I stutter? Throw it away. And if I hear one more word from you tonight, I will call the agency and tell them you stole from me. Do you understand what happens to a woman like you when that kind of accusation follows her? No one will ever hire you again. No one will ever believe you over a Korean woman in this country. Now move. Zara's hands were shaking as she picked up the flowers from the floor. The camera caught her face as she turned away, and Yiho watched something in him break watching it. She was not crying, not yet. She was holding it back with everything she had, holding back months of it, years of it. A lifetime of learning that in rooms like this, her pain was not something anyone was going to notice, or care about, or fix. Yiho set the phone down on the desk. He sat in the dark for a long time. The rain was still coming down outside. The city was still moving. Everything in the world was still spinning the way it always spun. But something inside Kwon Yiho had gone completely, irreversibly still. He thought about Zara, about the woman who woke up before dawn every single day to make sure his coffee was perfect, who never complained, who never asked for a single thing beyond what she was owed, who had once stayed up an entire night nursing one of the other staff members' children back to health when the child got sick, not because anyone asked her to, but because that was simply who she was. And then he thought about Suyeon, the woman he had married 5 years ago, the woman who kissed him on the cheek every morning, the woman who held his hand at public events and whispered, "I love you," when they were alone, the woman who had been, in private, methodically destroying another human being for months, not out of passion, not out of jealousy, out of something far colder, something calculated and deliberate and utterly without conscience. The next morning, Yiho did not confront his wife. He did something far more dangerous. He began to watch. For the next 7 days, Yiho observed Suyeon with the same cold, patient attention he brought to every operation that mattered in his life. He watched how she moved through the apartment when she thought no one important was looking. He noticed things he had been completely blind to before. The way her tone shifted the instant they were alone, dropping the warmth like a coat she no longer needed. The way she looked at Zara, not with irritation, not with impatience, but with a contempt so casual, so deeply rooted, that it seemed to come from somewhere far older than this marriage, this house, this life. He watched Suyeon set traps, small ones, cruel ones. One morning, she told Zara to polish the kitchen counters using a specific cloth, a cloth that Yiho later confirmed was meant for bathroom tiles and would leave streaks on marble no matter how hard you worked. When the counters came out streaky, Suyeon called Zara into the living room. 2 of Yiho's business associates were sitting on the sofa, drinking tea, making small talk. Suyeon didn't lower her voice. She didn't hesitate. "I honestly don't know why I keep her," Suyeon said, gesturing toward Zara with a wave of her hand. "She can't even clean a counter properly. It's embarrassing." The 2 men shifted uncomfortably. One of them cleared his throat and changed the subject. Nobody said a word to defend Zara. And Zara didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't look up. She simply bowed her head slightly and said, in a voice so quiet it barely carried, "I am sorry, Mrs. Suyeon. I will do better." Then she turned and walked back into the kitchen. Yiho followed her 20 minutes later, after the guests had left. He found her sitting on the floor beside the refrigerator. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. Her arms were wrapped around them. She was breathing slowly, deliberately, the way someone breathes when they are using every ounce of strength they have left just to keep themselves from coming apart. She didn't see him standing in the doorway, and he didn't let her know he was there. He just watched, and he memorized, and he felt something harden inside his chest that was not anger anymore. It was something quieter, something with teeth. That evening, Suyeon left for a charity event. The moment the door closed behind her, Yiho walked to Zara's quarters at the end of the hallway. He knocked softly. When she opened the door, the first thing that hit him was how small the room was. Barely big enough for the single bed, a dresser, and a wooden chair. There was no window. The only light came from a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. No shade, no warmth, just light. Mr. Kwon, Zara straightened immediately. 8 months of training taking over before the rest of her brain could catch up. I didn't expect you. Can I get you something? Water, tea. Sit down, Zara. She hesitated. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. Her eyes lowered just enough to show respect, but not so much that she couldn't see his face. The posture of someone who had spent years learning exactly how much space she was allowed to take up in a room. Yi-ho pulled the wooden chair closer and sat directly across from her, close enough that she couldn't look away. How long has this been going on? He asked. Zara's eyes flickered. Something moved behind them, surprise, maybe, or fear, or something rarer and more painful than either. The fragile, terrified hope that someone had finally noticed. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Kwon. Yes, you are. How long has my wife been treating you this way? For a long time, Zara said nothing. Her fingers tightened around each other in her lap. Yi-ho could see her weighing every possible response, calculating the risk of honesty against the cost of silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Since the first week, Mr. Kwon, but it is not unusual. In many of the houses I have worked in, the wife does not see me as a person. I have learned to accept it. You should not have to accept it. Zara looked up at him, and for the first time since he had known her, the composure she wore like armor, that quiet, unshakable steadiness, cracked. Not completely, not with tears or outbursts, just a slight trembling at the edges, a hairline fracture in something she had spent a very long time holding together. With respect, Mr. Kwon, acceptance is how I survive. Her voice was steady even as her hands were not. It is how women like me survive in houses like this. We don't have the luxury of fighting back. We have visas, we have contracts. We have families who depend on the money we send home every single month. If I complain, if I say one word, I lose everything. My job, my visa, my ability to take care of my mother back in Lagos, so I accept, and I keep going. Because that is the only choice that has ever been available to me. Yi-ho nodded slowly. He understood survival. He had built an entire empire on the back of it, but survival was supposed to protect the things that mattered to you, not eat them alive. I'm going to fix this, he said. Zara shook her head gently, almost sadly. Mr. Kwon, please, do not put yourself in trouble for me. Mrs. Soo-yeon is your wife. I am no one. I am just the help. You are not no one, Zara. He stood up and left before she could respond, but her words stayed with him long after the door closed, especially the way she had said, women like me. Not with bitterness, not with anger, with acceptance, as if there were a whole category of human beings on this earth whose suffering was simply built into the way the world worked. And everyone had agreed to pretend it wasn't there. Over the next 3 days, Yi-ho moved fast, quietly, with the same surgical precision he brought to every deal that mattered. He called Park Ja-yeon, his personal attorney, a sharp, uncompromising woman who specialized in criminal defense and family law and had never once lost a case she believed in. He told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said 2 words, send everything. He called Lee Sung-min, a former intelligence operative turned private investigator who had worked for the Kwon family for years and had never once leaked a single piece of information to anyone. Lee was the kind of man who could find out what someone had for breakfast 3 weeks ago if he needed to. Yi-ho needed him to find out everything. And quietly, carefully, without triggering any alerts on Soo-yeon's accounts, he began moving money. Not large amounts. Nothing that would catch her attention. Just enough to make sure that when the moment came, every piece of evidence was preserved, documented, and airtight. Soo-yeon noticed nothing. She continued her routine with the same effortless confidence she had always carried. The morning skincare ritual that took 45 minutes. The afternoon shopping trips to Cheongdam-dong. the evening social events that kept her name circulating in the circles that mattered to her. She continued to treat Zara as though she were a piece of furniture that occasionally malfunctioned and needed to be reminded of its place. On the fourth day, everything changed. Yiho was in his study, reviewing documents, when Suyeon appeared in the doorway. She was dressed perfectly, as always. Her hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless but had taken her 20 minutes to arrange. She held a cup of tea in one hand and a printed document in the other. Yiho, come sit with me. I want to talk to you about something. He followed her into the kitchen and sat across from her at the island counter. She set the document down between them and wrapped both hands around her tea. I've been thinking about Zara, she began. Her voice was gentle, concerned, the voice of a wife looking out for her family. And I don't think she's working out. What do you mean? She's been making mistakes, Yiho. Small things at first, burning the rice, forgetting to set out the guest towels before your colleague came on Tuesday. But it's getting worse. Suyeon paused, and the concern on her face deepened just enough to be convincing. I think she might be having some kind of mental health issues. I've heard her talking to herself at night. I found her crying in her room twice last week. She seems confused sometimes, like she doesn't know where she is or what day it is. Yiho kept his expression completely neutral. He had spent decades perfecting this skill. Suyeon, for all her social intelligence, had never once been able to read him when he didn't want to be read. What are you suggesting? He asked. I think we should let her go. I've already contacted the agency. They can have a replacement here within the week. Suyeon took a sip of her tea and added, almost casually, someone who fits better here, someone more suitable for a household like ours. Yiho understood exactly what fits better meant. He had seen enough of the world to know, and it had absolutely nothing to do with competence. I'll think about it, he said. Suyeon smiled, a small, satisfied smile, the smile of someone who believed she had won. That night, long after Suyeon had fallen asleep, Yiho sat in his study with Lee Sung-min on a secure video call. The investigator had spent the past 72 hours compiling everything, security footage, phone records, and statements from 2 former employees who had quietly agreed to speak. The pattern is clear, Lee said, his voice flat and professional. Suyeon has a documented history of verbal and psychological abuse toward domestic workers, specifically toward women of color. 2 previous employees left this household within months of being hired. One of them, a Filipino woman named Maria Santos, filed a formal complaint with the Labor Bureau 2 years ago. Yiho leaned forward. What happened to the complaint? It was buried. Suyeon's family has connections at the Bureau. The complaint was dismissed before it ever reached a hearing. Maria Santos was quietly deported 6 months later on a technicality. The room was silent for a long moment. Yiho thought about Maria Santos, a woman he had never met. A woman whose pain had been erased so completely that not a single trace of it remained. He thought about how many others there might be, women just like her, just like Zara, whose suffering had been swallowed by a system designed to protect people like Suyeon and forget people like them. What do we have on Zara's situation specifically? He asked. Enough to destroy her. Lee's voice was careful now, precise. The security footage alone is devastating, but there's more. The phone records show Suyeon coordinating with 2 other women, the wife of a real estate developer named Kang and the daughter of the media mogul Park in a private group chat. They discuss strategies for managing what they call the help situation. The language in these messages is explicitly racist, dehumanizing, and it is all in writing. Lee shared the screenshots. Yiho read them one by one on his secure phone, each message landing like a punch. Suyeon had written, "These African girls think they can just come here and act like they belong. I'm making sure Zara understands exactly where she stands in this house." The real estate developer's wife replied, "Same with mine. She actually tried to sit at the dinner table with us last week. I almost choked on my food." And then Suyeon's response, the one that made Yiho's blood go cold. "Don't worry, By the time I'm done with Zara, she'll beg to go back to wherever she came from. These people are so easy to break. Yiho set the phone down. He stared at the wall for a long time. The rain was still falling outside. The city was still breathing below him, but something had changed in the room. Something had shifted in the air. It was the moment Yiho understood, truly understood, that this was not about discipline, not about boundaries, not about managing a household. Suyeon had not seen Zara as a person. She had seen her as something to be broken, deliberately, methodically, for the pleasure of watching it happen. The plan came together over the next 2 days, with a kind of quiet precision that Kwon Yiho brought to every move that truly mattered. Park Jae-yeon drafted the divorce papers. They were built on Suyeon's documented pattern of psychological abuse and the evidence of a coordinated, racially motivated campaign against a vulnerable employee. Every piece of evidence was cataloged. Every recording was time-stamped. Every message was preserved. Lee Sung-min made sure all of it was stored in 3 separate secure locations, accessible only to Yiho and his attorney. Nothing could be deleted. Nothing could disappear. And Yiho prepared the final piece himself, a conversation, one that Suyeon would never see coming. On Thursday evening, Suyeon hosted a small dinner at the penthouse. 4 couples, all from the upper tier of Seoul's business world. Zara prepared the entire meal in the kitchen, working in silence, invisible, the way she always worked when Suyeon's guests were present. The food was extraordinary. Every person at that table complimented it. Suyeon accepted every compliment with grace and warmth and a smile that made her look like the perfect hostess. Not one person at that table knew who had actually cooked the meal. After the last guest left and the door closed for the final time, Suyeon sank into the sofa with a glass of champagne. She stretched her legs out and let out a long, satisfied breath. Yiho sat across from her. A glass of whiskey sat on the table in front of him, untouched. "What a wonderful evening," Suyeon said, swirling her glass gently. "Did you see how impressed Mr. Shin was? I think we've secured exactly the connection we needed for the Busan expansion. This is going to be a very good year for us, Yiho." She looked at him, waiting for him to smile back, waiting for him to say something warm and appreciative and normal. He didn't. "Suyeon." Something in his voice made her stop. The glass paused halfway to her lips. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, just enough to show that she had heard it. The shift in tone, the weight behind the single word. "What is it?" Yiho reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He turned the screen toward her slowly and held it so she could read what was on it. It was her own message, the one she had sent to the real estate developer's wife, the one about how easy Zara was to break. Suyeon's face went perfectly still. The champagne glass lowered to her lap. Her fingers tightened around the stem. Her eyes moved across the words on the screen, her own words, her own handwriting, her own cruelty, and for a single electric second, Yiho saw something real flash across her face. Not guilt, fear. Then it was gone. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was calm, controlled. But underneath it, something was working fast, recalculating, searching for an exit, trying to find the angle that would let her spin this into something survivable. "It doesn't matter where I got it. What matters is what it says. And this," Yiho swiped his finger across the screen, "is only the beginning." He showed her the security recordings, one after another. Suyeon throwing Zara's flowers on the floor. Suyeon forcing Zara to eat alone in the storage room. Suyeon tearing apart the letter to Zara's mother. Each one played in silence. Each one landed like a door closing. Suyeon set down her champagne glass very carefully, very deliberately. The way someone handles something fragile when they are trying very hard not to let their hands shake. "Yiho, you need to understand the context here. Managing household staff is complicated. Sometimes boundaries need to be set firmly, or..." Boundaries. Yiho said the word once, flat, without expression. He let it sit in the air between them like something with weight. Suyeon paused. Then she tried again, her voice shifting into a gentler register. More careful now, more measured. Yes, Zara has been difficult since day one. She tests limits constantly. I am simply maintaining the standards of this household. You hired her, but I manage her. That is how this works, Yiho. You told her she was not allowed to eat at the dining table. You made her sleep in a windowless room with no heat. You threw away a letter she wrote to her mother. You threatened to destroy her career if she ever spoke up. And you coordinated with other women to plan how to systematically dehumanize her. Yiho listed each one slowly, deliberately, watching Soo-yeon's face with every word, watching the composure crack piece by piece like ice breaking apart in spring. This is not enforcing boundaries, Soo-yeon. This is abuse. That is a very strong word. Soo-yeon's voice had dropped, dangerous now, and I would be very careful about using it in this marriage. It is also the word that is going to appear in the divorce papers. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Yiho had ever heard in his life. Soo-yeon did not move. She did not blink. She sat perfectly still on that sofa, the sofa she had picked out herself, in the apartment she had decorated herself, in the life she had built so carefully around the image of perfection, and she stared at Yiho as though she were trying to find the crack in his resolve. The weakness, the bluff. There was none. Divorce, she said. The word came out flat, empty, like she was tasting it for the first time and trying to decide if it was real. Over a maid. Over the kind of person you are, Yiho said. The maid is simply the evidence. Soo-yeon stood up. She began to pace. Her bare feet were silent on the marble. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Her mind was moving fast. Yiho could see it in her eyes, the rapid calculations, the desperate search for leverage. You are not thinking clearly, she said. Everything we have built, the connections, the reputation, the social standing, all of it depends on this marriage holding together. You want to throw all of that away over some sob story about a Nigerian cleaning woman. I want to throw it away because I married someone I did not know, and now I do. Soo-yeon stopped packing. She turned to face him, and for one moment, just one, something real broke through, something frightened, something almost human. Then it was gone. Fine, she said. Her voice was steel now, cold and hard and utterly without warmth. But you should know that I have connections too, Yiho, connections that don't show up in courtrooms. And if you think, I know exactly what connections you have. Yiho's voice was quiet, the quietest it had been all night, and that was what made it dangerous. I have known about them for longer than you think. Every threat you make from this point forward will be documented and added to the evidence already in my attorney's hands. Park Jae-yeon is very good at what she does, and the Labor Bureau connection your family used to bury Maria Santos's complaint. That has already been reported to the prosecutor's office. Soo-yeon's face went white. Not pale, not flushed, white, the color draining out of it all at once like someone had pulled a plug. Maria Santos, she whispered. Yes, and the two other women before Zara, and every message in your group chat. All of it, Soo-yeon, all of it is already on record. There is nowhere left for you to go. Soo-yeon sat back down, slowly. The way someone sits when the ground has moved beneath them and they are no longer entirely sure it will hold. For the first time in their marriage, for the first time in her entire carefully constructed life, Kwon Choi Soo-yeon had run out of moves. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. The prenuptial agreement Soo-yeon had signed without reading carefully, because she had never once imagined a world in which Yiho would want out, left her with a modest settlement and strict conditions. She was prohibited from contacting Zara. She was prohibited from contacting any current or future employees of Yiho's household. Her social circle began to distance itself within days, once the details quietly reached the people who mattered. Seoul's elite was a small world. Word traveled fast, and it traveled without mercy. Soo-yeon moved out on a gray Tuesday morning. 3 suitcases, nothing else. She did not say goodbye to Zara. She did not say goodbye to anyone. The next day, Yiho found Zara in the kitchen. She was preparing breakfast the way she did every morning, quietly, carefully, with the kind of attention that came from years of practice and not from joy. She looked up when he walked in, and for a moment, the wariness was back in her eyes. The same wariness he had seen the night he first overheard Soo-yeon in the kitchen. The look of someone who had learned that even good things could disappear. "Mr. Kwon, good morning. Your coffee is almost ready." "Sit down, Zara." She hesitated, then she sat at the kitchen island, her hands folded in her lap. Small, contained, careful, the way she always sat, the way she had been taught to sit. "I want to tell you something," Yi-ho said, "and I need you to hear it clearly." Zara looked up at him and waited. "What happened in this house was not your fault. It was not something you deserved, and it was not something you should have ever had to survive." For a long moment, Zara didn't move, didn't speak. She just sat there, absorbing the words, turning them over, testing them against everything she had been told her entire life about what she was worth, and where she belonged and how much space she was allowed to take up in the world. Then something broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just a slight trembling of her lower lip. A slow, deep breath, the kind that releases something you have been holding inside your body for a very long time. Something that has been waiting in the dark for someone to finally say out loud what it felt like. "Thank you, Mr. Kwon," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "No one has ever said that to me before." Yi-ho nodded. "I have set up a fund in your name. It is not charity. It is what you are owed for the months you spent in this house being treated as though you were less than human. It is enough for you to go back to the United States, start over, and never again have to take a job out of desperation. What you do with it is entirely your choice." Zara stared at him for a long time, and Yi-ho watched something shift in her expression, not gratitude, though gratitude was part of it. Something deeper, something quieter. The slow, fragile, terrifying beginning of believing that the world might contain more than what she had been shown. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything. Just know this, what you told me that night in your room about how women like you survive by accepting things, I need you to understand that you don't have to accept it anymore. Not here, not anywhere, not ever again." Zara pressed her lips together. She held herself together the way she always had, with discipline, with silence, with the quiet strength that had carried her through every single room she had ever been made to feel invisible in. But this time it was different. This time she wasn't holding herself together to survive. She was holding herself together because she was beginning, for the first time in a very long while, to believe that she might actually be okay. 6 months later, Zara Akhafer returned to the United States. She settled in Atlanta. She used the fund Yi-ho had provided to open a placement agency, one built on a single, unshakable principle. She named it Dignity First. Within a year, it had become one of the most respected agencies on the East Coast, specializing in connecting domestic workers with employers who saw them as human beings. Not as furniture, not as ghosts, as people. Yi-ho heard about it through a mutual contact. He smiled, quietly, privately, the way men like him smile when something good enters the world and no one is watching. Soo-yeon, for her part, disappeared into a smaller life in a less fashionable part of Seoul. She was largely forgotten by the social world she had once ruled. She had not changed, but she had learned something Yi-ho had intended her to learn from the very beginning. That power without conscience is only borrowed, and that the people you choose to look down on are often the ones holding the mirror up to exactly who you are. And if this story made you feel something, if it stayed with you, if it made you think about the way we treat the people the world tells us to ignore, then hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember this, the way we treat the people no one is watching us treat is the truest measure of who we really are.